All right, so we are moving on to 3.3. After this section, we will have a quiz also. But here is what we're talking about here. We're talking about rational numbers. And what a rational number is a rational number is basically a number you can write as a fraction, right? Whole numbers like the number 10, you can write it as a fraction, 10 over 1. Okay? We're going to reduce, basically we're going to reduce fractions. We'll talk about how to do it, but most of it's going to be done on the calculator. Go between mixed numbers and proper fractions. I'll show you how to do that on the calculator. Express rational numbers as decimals. Express decimals in the form of A over B. Multiply and divide. Add and subtract fractions and decimals, order of operations. And I don't think we'll get into the density property. So let me, where is, all right, is it got anything about rational numbers anywhere? No. All right, so like I said, a rational number is a number that can be written as a fraction. Okay? It's also a decimal. It could be as a decimal, as long as it's not one of these decimals that go on forever. Like pi goes 3.1415, blah, 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 forever and ever and ever and ever. That's not a rational number. So we're not looking at anything like that today. The fundamental principle of rational numbers is basically how we reduce fractions. To reduce a rational number or a fraction to its lowest term, divide both the numerator and denominator by the greatest common divisor. So we'll step through how we actually do this, but then I'm going to show you on the calculator because that's where most of our work's going to be done. So if I want to simplify the fraction 12 over 18, what I need to do is I need to find the largest, it's the greatest common divisor, the largest number that will divide evenly to both 12 and 18. 3 is 1, but it's not the largest. Does anybody else see one? 6. 6 is the largest thing they'll go on. So what I do is 12 is 2 times 6, and 18 is 3 times 6. That's a 2. All right, and what happens is the 6's, since one's in the numerator and one's in the denominator, cancel with each other. And then I'm left with what's left. If there was more than one, I'd multiply them back out, but I'm left with 2/3. So that's actually what's happening when we simplify a fraction. Now, when we talk about calculators, both this TI-83 and this calculator right here, which most of our cases, this smaller calculator is easier to use. You'll see up here, I've got the TI-83, which I have these back here, the graphing calculator. Okay, to get to the fractions on the graphing calculator, you hit alpha Y, and notice what happens when I hit alpha Y. If I hit alpha Y, it pulls up my fractions. Here's a regular fraction, here's a mixed number. Here's how you go back and forth between mixed number and regular fractions, and here's between fractions and decimals. If you're looking at this calculator, fractions are right there. N over D, mixed numbers are right above it, so you'd have to hit second that button. To go back and forth between mixed and regular is above this. You hit second this button, fraction to decimal to here. And this double arrow button down here does a lot of that too. It goes back and forth between fractions and decimals. But notice, this is a regular fraction, so I'd pick 1. And then what was that? 12 over 18. I would just put in 12 over 18. Uh-oh. Same thing, I would hit this button, 12 over 18, and notice when I hit enter, it will reduce the fraction for me. Same thing's going to happen with this calculator. You can try it out. Fraction, 12 over 18, So I'm not going to ask you to go through and simplify by hand. We've got the calculator, so we're going to use them. So anytime it asks you to simplify a fraction, either calculator, you can punch it in and simplify the fraction. Okay? Let me go back to my other screen. All right? But that's what's actually happening right there. All right, so if I want to reduce 130 over 455, all right. Now, if I was doing it by hand, if I don't know the largest one, I could start with any factor I know, like 5 will go into both of those, reduce it by that, then look at what's left and reduce it. But 130 over 455, it's going to be much easier if we use whatever calculator. And if you're at home watching this, and you don't have a calculator that will, you can actually, there's apps for this actual calculator that you can get. So let's see, I forgot alpha y, and there's my fraction. And what was the numbers? 130 over 455. So I'm going to type in 130 over 455. Hit enter. 2/7. Reduces to 2/7. Okay, so we don't need to spend a lot of time there. A lot of this is just calculator activities. And for you people that's watching this at home, at the end of the lesson, I'll get you the app that copies that calculator. I can't remember it off the top of my head. All right, mixed number. A mixed number consists of the sum of an integer and a rational number. Mostly when they're talking about rational numbers here, they're talking about fractions. So the sum of an integer and a fraction expressed without the use of an addition sign. For example, 3 4/5 really means 3 plus 4/5. All right, an improper fraction is a rational number whose numerator is greater than its denominator. So mixed numbers and improper fractions are sort of the same, right? We can always take an improper fraction, turn it to a mixed number. We can take a mixed number and turn it to an improper fraction. Okay? And let's see how we do that. So that's one of the things we want to be able to do. And I'm not going to go over that. I'm going to show you. If I want to write 3 4/5 as an improper fraction, all right, without the calculator. Remember what we do is we multiply the big number out front by the denominator. 3 times 5. We're going to multiply 3 times 5, which is 15. And then you add the numerator, which is 4. And we get 19. And the denominator stays the same. So 19/5 and 3 4/5 are equal to each other. So for a mixed number to improper, you multiply the integer out front by the denominator, add the numerator, and then the denominator of the fraction stays the same. So 6 1/2, that would be 6 times 2, which is 12, plus 1 is 13. So that would be 13 over 2. 4 5/8, 4 times 8 is 32, plus 5 is 37 over 8. Okay? Now, on the calculator, it is very similar to this one. You just have to find the right buttons. If I have a mixed number, number 2's mixed numbers. Let's say I have 5 3/5. All right, if I'm doing it by hand, I would multiply 5 times 5, add 3. That would be 25 plus 3, 28 over 5. But on this calculator, all I've got to do is hit alpha y. On this calculator, it's right here above this times 10n. Shows a fraction to a mixed number. Notice the third one down is a fraction to a mixed number, so I'm going to pick the third option, and then I hit enter. And what happened? It didn't change it. Let's try that again. Whoops. Three. There it goes. 28 over 5. Okay. If I have a same thing, if I have a improper fraction and I want to change it to a mixed number on the calculator, I just use the same button and it's going to change it back to a mixed number. Okay. So very simple once we get to doing it on the calculator. All right. Now, how do we go the other direction if I didn't have a calculator? 42 over 5. How would I change 42 over 5 to a mixed number? Remember what we do is we take and we divide the numerator by the denominator. So 5 will go into 42 8 times. That's an 8. 5 times 8 is 40. And what's my remainder? 2. So the number that went up here becomes the integer or the big part out front. All right. The remainder becomes the numerator. And then what I was dividing by, it always stays the same. The denominator stays the same. So that's 8 2/5. All right. 8 goes into 25 3 times. Right? 3 times 8 is 24. So 25 minus 24 means there's a remainder of 1 over 8. The denominator stays the same. 5 goes into 17 3 times. 5 times 3 is 15. So 17 minus 15 means there was 2 left over 5. You don't have to do any of this by hand, though. Calculators are here to help us out. Right? We put in the fraction, then we hit this button right here that changes it to a mixed number. All right. Any fraction can be expressed as a decimal by dividing the denominator into the numerator. Okay, so the next thing they're going to want you to do is they're going to give you fractions, and they're going to want you to write the decimal equivalent. On this calculator, all you got to do is type in the fraction 5 over 8. Then you have 2 options. You can use the F to D, fraction to decimal, or you can use this little arrow down here. On this calculator, or the other option is you can actually say 5 divided by 8. Okay, so notice here, I could say 5 divided by 8 because a fraction, that means division, numerator divided by the denominator. And notice when I do that, I get 0.625. All right, I could have also typed in the fraction 5 over 8. All right, now notice when I type in the actual fraction, I hit enter, it's just going to give me a reduced fraction. So to change that to a decimal, I hit alpha Y, and there's the F to D, number 4 there. So I hit number 4, and there it changes it to a decimal for me. So we don't need to go through and do this long division. We've got our calculators, okay? All right, 7/11ths, 7 divided by 11, or you can do it just like that. 7 divided by 11 is 0.636363 repeating, right? So how would I write 0.63 repeating? Right, we got to use that little line. So I would put 0.63, and then I would put a line over both the 6 and the 3 because it's the 6-3 that repeats. If it went 0.633333, then I would only put the line over the 3, correct? All right. Expressing decimals as a quotient of 2 integers. Basically, they're wanting to know, how do we take a decimal and rewrite it as a fraction? Okay, well, we have to know the spots. Okay, 1's place, 10's place, but once we get to the right of the decimal, it goes tenths, hundredths, thousands, 10 thousandths, 100 thousandths. This tells us what the denominator of the fraction is going to be. The actual number that's in the decimal tells us the numerator. Okay? So, this one right here. Now, a terminating decimal, that's what we're talking about. It's a decimal that terminates. It stops. It doesn't keep going on and on forever. Okay? 0.7. 0.7, that 7, the end of the decimal part is in the 10th spot. So that means 10 is going to be our denominator, and that decimal portion becomes my numerator. And then I would need to reduce it if I can. That one's not going to reduce. So 0.7, which is 7/10, written as a fraction, is 7/10. All right. On this calculator, if I put in 0.7, and then I could hit this double arrow, I think, or I can go the fraction to decimal, second fraction to decimal. On the calculator, the other calculator, F to D, changes it back and forth between decimals and fractions. All right. The next one, 49, that ends in the 100th spot. So this would be 49 over 100. Now notice 0.048. That 8, that for decimal ends in the 1,000th spot. So I would have to put 48 over 1,000, and that one will actually simplify. Now the nice thing about the calculators is if I put a 0.048 and I hit second alpha y, and I go 4 there to change it to a fraction, it will go ahead and change it to a fraction and reduce the fraction all at once. All right. So once again, this is all just a bunch of calculator stuff, getting used to our calculators, really. All right. All right. Now, I'm not going to go through this. Let me see if we have a repeating decimal. I know these calculators will actually take a repeating decimal and change it to a fraction. Let me see if this one will. Let's say I put 0.11111. I just put it in a bunch of times. Let's see what happens. I haven't even tested it. And I go 4 to change that to there it goes. It will go ahead and change it to a fraction for me. Okay. So we're going to do that. If it is a repeating decimal, 0.6 repeating, what you're going to do in the calculator is just going to put that repeating part in there a bunch of times, and then we're going to go change it to a fraction. And notice it will change it to a fraction for you. Okay? So I'm not going to really get into that, doing it by hand right now, because we can use these calculators to do that. All right, let me go back to this. All right, we just did that. 0.6 as a fraction was 2/3. So 0.23 is a fraction. 0.23 repeating, so I would put 0.23, 23, 23. Let's see if this will change it. 23 over 99. All right. Let me see if I can. Yeah, for those people watch at home, you distance learners, if you don't have a calculator, the app I found that's exactly like this calculator is Calculate 84. Okay. I know on my iPhone, it has it. Calculate 84. I think if you're on a Samsung, they actually have a TI-84 app that you can get, but on an iPhone, that app right there will lead you to a calculator that's exactly like the one I'm sharing on here. Calculate 84. All right, now the rest of this is just going to be multiplying. All right. Dividing. All right, I'm not going to ask you to do any of this by hand. You can use your calculator. If you did want to do a multiplying fractions by hand, the way you multiply fractions is you multiply the numerators and you multiply the denominators. So that would be 15 over 88, and then you do need to reduce it. Your calculator is going to go ahead and reduce it for you. All right. Same thing there. I would multiply -2 times -9. And 3 times 4, -2 times -9 is 18, positive 18. 3 times 4 is 12. And that will reduce by a power factor of 6 to 3/2. All right. Same thing. 3 2/3 times 1 1/4. If I want to do it in the calculator, I would just alpha, I need a mixed number. 3 and I think that was 2/3. Arrow out of it, multiply, get another one. And what was that? 3 2/3 and 1 1/4. 1 1/4. Hit enter and I get 55 over 12. Now, because they started with mixed numbers, I would probably want to put my answer in mixed number form. So I'd go there and change it to a mixed number. Now, if I were doing that one by hand, I would need to change those to improper fractions first. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 2 is 11. I would do 11 over 3. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. And then I would multiply the top by the bottom, and I would get 55 over 12. And then I would say 12 goes into 55 4 times with 7 left over is how I would get to my answer. But please use the calculators. We have them here. You have them. Dividing, the only difference between dividing and multiplying, and you won't have to worry about this on your calculator. On the calculator, you can just type in 4/5 divided by 1/10. All right, but if I was doing this by hand, what we have to do is we have to change this division. Whenever you divide fractions, you actually change it to multiplication, and you multiply by the inverse of the second fraction. So what I would do is I would have 4/5, and I would change this to multiplication, and I would make that 10 over 1. This is how you multiply or divide fractions. The first fraction stays the same, then you have to change it to multiplication by the inverse. All right. Then I go through and I multiply the numerators. 40. 5 times 1 is 5. Then 40 over 5 equals 8. On the calculator, I can just say, either calculator, whichever one you use, 4/5 divided by 1/10. I hit enter, and notice I get 8. All right, same thing with this other calculator. All right. So multiplying and dividing fractions are essentially the exact same thing. This dividing, you just have to remember to flip the second fraction. I'm not going to keep going through. Make sure you use your signs. Adding and subtracting, same thing on the calculators. Okay, the one thing about adding and subtracting fractions by hand is you do have to have a common denominator, but when you're doing it on the calculator, it really doesn't affect it. Okay, but here 3/2 plus or 3/7 plus 2/7, Once the denominator is the same, you just add the numerator together. 3 plus 2 is 5, so I'd end up with 5 over 7. The denominator stays the same. 11 minus 5 is 6, so that would be 6. Denominator stays the same. Then I would have to reduce that to 1/2. All right. Same thing. I would probably go ahead and change those to improper. 5 times 4 is 20 plus 1, so that's a negative 21 over 4 minus, that's a negative 8, 9, 10, 11, negative 11 over 4 minus a negative is plus a positive. So negative 21 plus 11 is 10. So that ends up being 10 over 4, which is 5/2. Okay. But once again, we're using our calculators for most of this, or all of this. Just to refresh your memory on how you would add fractions if it doesn't have the same denominator. This is where we use our least common multiple, like we did in one of these sections. We would want to know what's the smallest number both 4 and 6 will go into. And it actually doesn't have to be the smallest. It just has to be a common multiple. But we like to use the smallest one, which would be 12. So what I would do is I would rewrite each fraction with a denominator of 12. And then I'd say, okay, I had to multiply 4 by 3 to get 12. So I got to multiply the numerator by that 3 also. 3 times 3 is 9 to make an equivalent fraction. As long as I multiply the top and the bottom of a fraction by the same thing, it's equivalent. 6 times 2 is 12. So I got to take that 1 times 2, which is 2. Now I have common denominators and I can just add the numerators together. All right, but once again, using these calculators, you don't even have to worry about common denominators. It's going to do that for you. And I think that's it. So I'll open up 3.3, I believe, for y'all to do.